On Tuesday, October 25th, 2016, Thunder River Rapids at Dreamworld in Queensland, Australia was operating normally. Raft 5 was exiting the conveyor when it collided with Raft 6 in the station area. The conveyor continued to run and pushed Raft 5 into Raft 6, which caused Raft 5 to flip upwards. Raft 5 was eventually flipped at a 90-degree angle, knocking 2 of the 6 riders out of the raft and causing them to fall onto the conveyor below them. 2 other riders were positioned directly under the conveyor when the raft flipped. This resulted in 4 riders being killed due to injuries from the ride's machinery that they came in contact with. The ride was closed and the investigation began. The Queensland Police Department immediately began the investigation into what caused the accident. They investigated everything from the design and modifications of the ride to the operational procedures and training. This would also uncover several past incidents that occurred on the ride. The investigation began by looking at the design of the ride and the CCTV footage from the accident. Thunder River Rapids was designed in-house by Dreamworld but took heavy inspiration from Intamin's River Rapids rides. Upon opening in 1986, it featured 2 large pumps to keep adequate flow of water traveling through the ride course. These pumps were placed at the highest point of the ride behind the station. The station was a turntable at roughly the same level as the pumps. At the end of the ride, there was a large conveyor that would pick up the returning rafts and bring them back into the station. In order for the Thunder River Rapids ride to operate properly, both pumps needed to be in operation, or else the water level could be too low. Investigators reviewed the CCTV footage from the day of the accident and observed the south pump shutting off and water flowing back into the pump outlet. This was somewhat of a design flaw, as the water level of the ride could drop rapidly if one pump were to fail, as the water was able to drain backwards through the stalled pump. Post-accident testing revealed that it only took 15 seconds after the pump failed for the water level to decrease by 20 centimeters or almost 8 inches, and 1 minute for the water level to decrease by 40 centimeters or almost 16 inches. The decrease in water level exposed the steel support rails that were in place to help keep rafts level when exiting the conveyor. Despite the pump failure and drop in water level, the ride's control system did not audibly alert the ride operators. The only indication of a pump failure was a flashing light on the panel. There was also no audible difference in the station between 1 or 2 pump operations. There was also no formal marker included in the ride's control system that indicated the proper water level, and it was up to the operators to monitor the water level using a scum mark left on the side of the trough in the station. On the day of the accident, the south pump failed on 2 separate occasions before the accident occurred. During one of these earlier failures, the operators recalled the water level decreasing so much that a raft which exited the conveyor became stuck on the metal support rails. After finding the design flaws with Thunder River Rapids pumps and water level system, investigators turned to the ride's control system for a closer look to see what safety systems were in place. Some of the most notable safety features built into the control system revolved around the conveyor. This included the raft safety stop, which shut off the conveyor if a raft became stuck at the bottom, a chain failure, which shut off the conveyor if the chain broke, and the anti-rollback gates, which prevented rafts from sliding backwards down the conveyor. Outside of these few safety features, the remaining components of the ride were left to the operators to monitor. The main operator panel was also the control point for the conveyor, water pumps, and pneumatic gates. All 3 of these components were controlled independently by the load operator, and there was no way to stop the entire ride at once. Investigators found that many people, including park employees and independent auditors, recommended the addition of a safety system that would be able to stop all parts of the ride. A system like this was never installed, even though other modifications were made to the ride. Further review of CCTV footage showed that in the accident, even after both rafts came in contact with each other, the conveyor continued to run for 11 seconds before it started to slow down, and then didn't cease movement until 8 seconds after it initially slowed down. Investigators found that there was no automated system in place to stop the conveyor if a raft became stuck in the station area. Even if an operator had noticed an impending collision, it may have already been too late to stop the ride, as no conveyor emergency stop was accessible from the main control panel. Instead, the main panel only had a conveyor stop button that took significantly longer to stop the ride. The only conveyor emergency stop in the station was only accessible to the unload operator and was unlabeled. Investigators tested the conveyor and found that it took the conveyor 8 seconds to stop after depressing the conveyor stop button located on the main panel, similar to what was witnessed in the CCTV footage. Investigators tested the emergency stop and found that it only took 2 seconds to stop the conveyor. After finding that Thunder River Rapids had many design flaws and lacked adequate safety features, they turned to Dreamworld's records to see if any modifications were made that could have affected the ride. They found that Thunder River Rapids was modified many times to make it run more effectively, but these modifications were poorly documented. The most significant of these modifications was the removal of the turntable station and the reduction of wooden planks used on the conveyor. Shortly after the ride opened in 1986, the conveyor was having mechanical trouble. The conveyor consisted of wooden planks placed roughly 16 centimeters apart from each other at the ride's opening. These wooden planks would often be damaged or ripped off completely from their holding chain. In an attempt to solve the problem, Dreamworld tasked multiple engineers to inspect the conveyor and come up with solutions. One engineer noted that the water flow from the south pump could have caused the planks to be knocked off. Additionally, due to the increased weight of the wet planks when the planks were turned down to the base, they could sag and get caught on the pump house wall and break off. They also noted that the chain that carried the wooden planks had excessive wear, and they cited the weight of the wooden planks as the cause. Their evaluation concluded that Dreamworld should remove every other wooden plank in an effort to reduce the weight of the conveyor, the flotation effect from the timber, and the number of things that could get caught. However, it was also noted that this modification should be temporary unless proven effective and safe with a trial run. While the exact date is unknown, sometime between 1988 and 1990, Dreamworld removed every second and third wooden plank in an attempt to reduce the weight of the conveyor. Whether or not there was a trial run of this modification was not documented. The removal of the wooden planks resulted in a gap of 78 centimeters between each plank, which was significantly larger than the originally designed gap of 16 centimeters. Another major modification made to the ride was the removal of the turntable. Many of the Intamin River Rapids rides that inspired Thunder River Rapids featured turntables to allow for simultaneous unload and load of riders to increase capacity. Thunder River Rapids opened with a turntable, but this proved to be problematic. Many of the issues with the turntable surrounded the rolling wheels that supported the circular platform, as their tires and bearings went bad quickly. Dreamworld spent a significant amount of money repairing the turntable, so it was decided eventually to come up with a less expensive replacement. In 1990, Dreamworld replaced the old turntable with a stationary load and separate unload station. By this time, the turntable support track was quickly deteriorating, and the turntable was unable to be driven properly when wet. While the removal of the turntable was a significant change, the most important change in relation to the accident was the addition of steel support rails at the end of the conveyor. These rails were added to assist with keeping the rafts level when exiting the conveyor belt and entering the now motionless station. The modifications in the station and on the conveyor resulted in two unintended consequences. In the event of a pump failure, the steel rails in the station were left exposed due to the drop in water level. Rafts exiting the conveyor would often get stuck on these support rails as there was no other method to move the rafts. In addition, when there was no wooden plank between the end of the conveyor and the start of the support rails, there was a gap of up to 76 centimeters. When the ride opened, this was of little concern, as there would consistently be wooden planks rounding the end of the conveyor, closing this distance to about 43 centimeters. But due to the removal of the second and third wooden planks, the larger gap was present more often between the steel support rails and the drive axle of the conveyor belt. The 76 centimeter gap was large enough for a raft to become lodged vertically into, as it had done in the accident. Out of every modification made to Thunder River Rapids, the most beneficial was the addition of the emergency stop buttons. Thunder River Rapids was not initially designed with emergency stop buttons, but had them added later on. Unlike other emergency stops, these buttons did not have the capability to stop the entire ride at once, but rather shut off the north pump, stop the conveyor, and close the emergency gate. That being said, there was no emergency stop button for the south pump. The emergency stops were located in the unload area of the ride and in the maintenance areas of the ride's conveyor itself. The ride's main panel did not feature an emergency stop, meaning the only way for operators to quickly stop the ride's conveyor was located in the unload area, completely separate from the rest of the ride's controls. After finding many issues with the design, modifications, and maintenance of the ride, investigators turned to the operational procedures that Dreamworld had in place. They reviewed the ride's training documents, operations manual, and interviewed the ride operators at the scene of the accident. Thunder River Rapids only required 2 operators, but had the possibility to extend to up to 4 operators, depending on the number of rafts the ride was running. This is common for rides of this type, as the models designed by Intamin allowed for an increased number of rafts to run, as long as more operators were present to assist with loading and unloading. Dreamworld commonly operated the ride with 2 total operators, one working the load position and one working the unload position. This is how the ride was operated on the day of the accident. Upon review of the training documents, investigators noted that there were 3 levels of training as part of Thunder River Rapids. The first 2 levels outlined the basic duties of each position and only required a minimum of 90 minutes of training. The 3rd level had the responsibility of overseeing the ride and was reserved for only the most experienced operators. On the day of the accident, one of the operators was trained at the load position or 2nd level that morning. The trainee worked both the unload and load positions and was signed off after 90 minutes of training. At no point during their training did they see or have to demonstrate their knowledge of how to deal with emergency situations or ride shutdowns. Many rides that feature unique downtime circumstances have scenario training. Dreamworld even reported that scenario training was completed on other rides in the park, but never on Thunder River Rapids. The newer operator was interviewed after the accident and claimed that they were told about the many different situations that could occur while operating Thunder River Rapids, but had a minimal understanding of how to deal with them. They were also told that the emergency stop is never really used, and they were shown a memorandum stating that the emergency stop is only to be used when the main panel was not reachable. At the time of the accident, the newer operator was at the unload position and had access to the emergency stop. In their interview, they claimed that they were not aware that the emergency stop would shut off the conveyor, and the button was only to be used if the load operator told them to. In addition to interviewing Thunder River Rapids operators, investigators reviewed the pre-opening safety checks that Dreamworld operators were responsible for completing prior to opening to the public. The most notable checks included ensuring that the ride was signed off by engineering, ensuring the access area around the ride was clear, and cycling one raft as a test run before guests could board. Ride operators were not responsible for testing any of the stop buttons, including the conveyor stop or the emergency stop buttons. Upon further interviews with park maintenance managers, none of the stop buttons were checked as part of the daily maintenance inspection. Maintenance documentation was found to be limited, with confusion around many of the procedures. Dreamworld's maintenance team did not keep logbooks for each ride in regards to their previous mechanical issues. The only documentation that Dreamworld kept was the work orders for each ride and spreadsheets with annual maintenance work. Documentation was so sparse that Dreamworld's general manager was unaware that any modifications were made to Thunder River Rapids throughout its history. Other maintenance personnel also struggled to explain Dreamworld's policies when it came to responding to ride mechanical downtime. Dreamworld's official procedures required that a maintenance supervisor be called to the scene after a ride had 2 mechanical breakdowns. Dreamworld's maintenance workers had different thoughts about the number of times a ride must go down before a supervisor got involved, as some workers thought that a ride must have 3 mechanical failures. Park maintenance workers were also supposed to get a supervisor involved if an issue put guests in immediate danger, but there was no clarification by Dreamworld of which situations were classified this way. Finally, no documentation was kept at Dreamworld about previous incidents on Thunder River Rapids. Investigators retrieved data from Ardent Leisure, Dreamworld's parent company, about previous incidents that occurred on Thunder River Rapids. The most alarming incident occurred on January 18, 2001, during pre-opening checks. Only one operator was at the ride at the time, and they were dispatching rafts to complete their test cycles. 2 of the rafts became stranded in the unload area, and 3 additional rafts collided with the 2 stationary rafts. The 5 rafts piled up in the same area of the ride that the 2016 accident occurred in, with several of the rafts being upturned and flipped, much like in 2016. Thankfully, no one was injured during this accident as the rafts were not loaded. The investigation that followed cited the cause as operational due to only one attendant being at the ride when there should have been 2, and a short interval in which the rafts were dispatched relative to each other. The 2016 accident investigation claimed that this investigation did not look into the mechanical side of the ride and only addressed the concerns related to operational procedures. Another close call occurred on the ride on November 6, 2014. The ride experienced a low air pressure alarm. A ride operator who had over 6 years of experience with Thunder River Rapids initiated the shutdown procedure that involved stopping dispatching rafts. In the process of this, the operator mistakenly shut off one of the ride's water pumps, causing the water level to drop and one raft to become stranded on the rails in the station. A second raft climbed the conveyor belt and collided with the stalled raft in the station, shaking violently before the conveyor was eventually stopped. The ride operator then broke Dreamworld policy by restarting the stopped pump in an attempt to move the stalled raft and prevent the rafts downstream from drifting into the ride's drainage pond. This included a raft that was sitting at the bottom of the stopped conveyor. The operator then restarted the conveyor. Investigators claimed that the increased water pressure caused by restarting the pump put the raft at the base of the conveyor at great risk of flipping. No one was injured in this accident and the ride operator was terminated, but none of the underlying mechanical concerns with the ride were addressed. In an interview with investigators, the operator stated that the Thunder River Rapids was more difficult to operate than other rides, as there were a lot of tasks to undertake simultaneously. This is what's known as task saturation. The number and complexity of different things going on when something would go wrong with the ride would often cause operators to lose focus on what really mattered in the situation. On well-designed rides, and most rides, one obvious stop button exists that stops all ride systems as soon as safely possible. This ride featured no such button, and the ride systems had to be shut off individually, with the presence or lack of one system having unintended consequences for the others. Sadly, neither of these two accidents caused any changes to the underlying design issues with the ride. Instead, ride operators were disciplined, retrained, or terminated. These issues would remain present at the time of the 2016 accident. On the morning of October 25, 2016, Thunder River Rapids went through its daily mechanical inspection and was signed off for operation by park maintenance. During the operator startup checks, one of the operators noticed that the amperage in the south pump was fluctuating significantly and reaching over 500 amps at one point. However, the visual alarm that indicated a pump issue did not activate. Dreamworld maintenance was called to the scene and completed an inspection on the panel. Maintenance found no issues during the inspection, and the mechanic told the operator to call him again if they had any trouble. Thunder River Rapids opened for the day with 2 operators and a trainee at 10:05 a.m. The trainee was shown both the load and unload positions and was told very basic information about some of the situations that could occur. At some point, the trainer pointed to the emergency stop button, which at the time had the other operator's water bottle on top of the casing, and explained how it only shut off the conveyor. The trainee was also told not to worry about using the emergency stop button, and that there were very few situations in which it would actually be used at all. At around 11:15 a.m., the trainee completed training after 90 minutes and was signed off. They were left to work the load position, which included the main panel. The newly trained employee was sent on break shortly before Thunder River Rapids had its first mechanical issue of the day, around 11:50 a.m. The operator noticed that the south pump had shut off, and they initiated the shutdown sequence. The operator closed the emergency jack, stopping future rafts from being dispatched, shut off the remaining pump, and turned off the conveyor, following the standard operating procedures. All of the rafts stopped safely in place. Park engineers arrived at the scene and reset the fault. Park electricians were busy at the time, so this simple fix was completed in an effort to reopen the ride. With no one actively looking into why the error had actually occurred, the ride would reopen at 12:21 p.m., and the newly trained associate would return from their break to relieve the load operator. Less than an hour later, the unload operator, who was also the designated person in charge of the ride, noticed the flashing pump light, which indicated that there was an issue. The newly trained load operator did not recognize this and swapped positions with the other operator, who initiated a shutdown. All of the water in the unload area drained away, resulting in the rafts resting on the support rails in the station. Dreamworld maintenance showed up and reset the pump for a second time. The situation was not escalated to a maintenance supervisor, as based on post-accident interviews, these mechanics were under the impression that the ride could continue to operate until the fault occurred for a third time before having to escalate to a supervisor. Thunder River Rapids reopened at 1:25 p.m. with the newly trained operator at the unload position and the more experienced operator at the load position. With this information uncovered, we can now accurately retell the events of the accident. Around 2 p.m. on October 25, 2016, Thunder River Rapids was operating normally. Raft 5 was loaded with 6 riders and dispatched into the watercourse. While Raft 5 traveled around the course, the south pump failed and the water level began to lower. Raft 6, which was dispatched before Raft 5, began to ascend the conveyor and make its way back to the station. Raft 6 exited the conveyor but became stranded on the support rails next to the unload station due to the low water level. The operator at the unload position noticed the stranded raft and attempted to get the attention of the load operator, who was focused on loading a raft at the time. The load operator saw the exposed support rails and proceeded to unload the previously loaded rafts. Both operators were unaware that Raft 5 was currently ascending the conveyor belt towards the stalled raft. The load operator noticed Raft 5 as it crested the top of the conveyor and depressed the conveyor stop button multiple times, but the conveyor did not stop. The newly trained unload operator faced towards the load platform awaiting instructions from the operator, who was frantically trying to stop the ride. The load operator never instructed the unload operator to press the emergency stop button, which would have shut off the conveyor within about 2 seconds. Both operators looked at the unfolding scene in horror to see two rafts make contact. Raft 5 pushed into Raft 6, which caused both rafts to pivot upwards. Raft 6 fell back downwards into a horizontal position, but completely blocked Raft 5 from moving forwards. Raft 5, now caught between the fixed edge of the support rails and the end of the conveyor in a vertical position, shook violently as each passing plank on the conveyor dug into the raft and started to pull it underneath the conveyor. The shaking knocked 2 of the 6 riders out of the raft and into the conveyor mechanism. The planks also pulled the raft downwards, rupturing the inflated tube and ripping apart the fiberglass, as well as entangling 2 riders seated near the conveyor. Raft 5 was stuck in this position for 15 seconds before the conveyor stopped. The conveyor stopped moving after almost 30 seconds from when the load operator had pressed the conveyor stop button. 4 of the 6 riders in Raft 5 were killed due to being caught in the conveyor mechanism. The investigation that followed revealed that the failing of the south pump was the primary cause of the accident. However, the investigation determined that the lack of safety features, inadequate mechanical and operational procedures all contributed to the accident. In particular, the fact that the pumps and conveyor for the ride were operated completely independently was found to be a large contributing factor. Had these systems been designed to work together, shutting down one when the other experienced a problem, this accident could have been completely avoided. Dreamworld closed for 6 weeks following the accident, and Thunder River Rapids was demolished following the investigation in 2018. The investigation did not place blame directly on Dreamworld, but did reasonably suspect that an offense was committed. Dreamworld's owner, Ardent Leisure, pleaded guilty and was fined $3.6 million Australian dollars. An audit campaign was launched by the Australian government that saw 6 major Australian theme parks, including Dreamworld, present an outline of the risks presented at their facilities and what steps they were taking to mitigate them. The audit occurred shortly after the accident in 2016 and again in 2017. The investigation inspired new legislation by the Australian government that required amusement parks to inspect rides more frequently and only allow completely trained operators to be left alone at a ride. A license program was also instituted which required parks to develop a safety plan for the maintenance and operation of each ride at their property. Dreamworld would reopen after the accident and remains open today with significantly changed policies and procedures. Operational procedures were reviewed and completely overhauled as the park now uses IROC by IRT, an industry standard training and auditing firm based in the US focused on ride operations. Thunder River Rapids was replaced in 2021 by Steel Taipan, a mock swing-launch coaster. River Rapids rides in general have more inherent risks than other rides. Their loosely controlled ride experience in water and manual operations present more risks than other rides like roller coasters and flat rides. This has been seen in a handful of other accidents even on rides made by established manufacturers. Thunder River Rapids, though, was on an entirely different scale of danger. Between its Band-Aid modifications to address problems with its original design, deficient operations, and confusing safety system, the ride was truly an accident waiting to happen once the right circumstances arose. There were so many design flaws that an established ride manufacturer would have avoided. For example, the height of the pump outlet at the top of the ride was lower than the rails in the station. This meant that if one pump were to fail, the rafts would stall in the station. Dreamworld and Australia have taken significant steps forward to ensure the safety of riders, and hopefully lessons learned from this accident continue to shape the future of ride design and operation. As always, if you enjoy the way I cover these accidents, please like and subscribe so that these videos appear above others. As always, the accident report is linked in the description. The report for this accident is packed with information, far more than most accidents I cover and more than I could fit into this video. If you'd like to learn more, I highly recommend reading through it. Thanks for watching and see you next time.